Here we go. Jake and Josh are here to analyze the game they love for the team they love. This is another Dolphins Podcast. Here's your host, Jake Mendel and Josh Houtz.
Thanks for tuning into another edition of another Dolphins Podcast. Thank you so much all for joining us. We have so much to get to in today's show. The Miami Dolphins decided to sign tight end Jonnu Smith. They have said goodbye to Jerome Baker. To me, that sounds like a cat and Houtz day. Boys, how you doing today?
Doing good. A lot of early changes. Yeah, I mean, Baker gone, Xavier Howard gone, Christian Wilkins probably gone, and they got a new tight end today. So a lot of changes going on.
Yeah, and we knew some changes were coming with the way the cap situation was, but I don't know that we'd see them going out there and getting a tight end like Jonnu Smith. So happy Jonnu Smith Day to all of our listeners, and I'm excited to be able to do this podcast with you. I'm not really sure what you meant by a Houtz and Cat podcast, because there was some good in there with Jerome with the Jonnu Smith sign, but then there was also some bad in there with Jerome Baker. I guess bad to some, right? Jerome Baker leaving, that's not the greatest thing for a Dolphins defense, in that linebacker room.
You can tell the way that this team was built. It was to push the chips in on defense in 2022, 2023. It's a shame things didn't work out. There are a lot of fan favorites that we are saying goodbye to, but I want to start offensively. I want to start on a positive note here. Let's talk about the fact that the Miami Dolphins have made the decision to sign Jonnu Smith. Now, the reports are still leaking out. We're hearing it's a 2-year, $10 million deal. We heard that he was flirting around with the Dolphins earlier in the week. They went and visited him. And most importantly, he does not impact the formula. If we're going to talk about compensatory picks, does not impact that whatsoever. So that's probably my favorite part of the entire thing. But Kat, before we talk about the actual signing, when you heard earlier this week that the Dolphins were kind of sniffing around the idea of bringing Jonnu Smith into this offense, what was kind of the first thought about how this group would kind of operate on the field?
And not a surprise, because they're going after Jonnu Smith intentionally because he was released, and he's not going to impact the compensatory formula, like you said. I mean, if the Dolphins do in fact lose Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt like we expect, you can expect the Dolphins to have all of their draft picks next year, plus probably a third for Wilkins, probably a fourth for Hunt, an extra fifth already from the Bradley Chubb trade. So now instead of, the Dolphins have had 4 draft picks in each of the last 2 years. If they continue to play this game here where they're stockpiling compensatory picks and draft picks, you could be talking about them having 10 or 11 picks next year instead of what they've had, the last 2 years and this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all sit here and say, we didn't really see this coming, right? But we're all stoked for this signing. We see what he can bring to this offense. I guess it does point to Chris Grier and kind of his genius, right? You're sitting here talking about how he's not going to count towards those compensatory picks that the Dolphins kind of need to restock up on with their current cap situation. But this is a guy who, has made impact elsewhere. Last season with the Falcons, had his career highs in targets, yards, had 3 touchdowns as well. He's a very versatile piece. So I don't know about you guys, but bring him into a unit that we all knew the Dolphins were going to probably upgrade, or at least try to bring in a tight end. They love Julian Hill, right? Durham Smythe is a great all-around type of guy, but I think Jonnu Smith brings a different type of skill set. So I like this move. He's coming home. I think he's a South Florida guy, and intrigued to see what the Dolphins have in store for him, because this could be that piece that I don't think, this isn't, Jonnu Smith's not going to put you over the hump, but we heard Mike McDaniel talk before about adding a tight end to this and that being that next element. I'm intrigued to see what John Embry, a guy who's had success elsewhere developing guys, can do with a guy who, let's be honest, was pretty highly coveted, at least among fantasy guys back in 2017. So I'm intrigued.
Yeah, if you think back to, I think it was the Dallas Cowboys game. That game was aired on Fox. It was the NFL game of the week. And there was I think it was Greg Olson who was talking about how he spoke with Mike McDaniel and said, hey, the first 2 years of this offense, we've set records. We scored 70 points in a game. But obviously teams are going to adjust. We saw an offense that had the 3rd lowest run rate over the final 3 games of the regular season. Their points per game absolutely plummeted. The signing of Jonnu Smith is just to kind of help things build in the right direction. But I do hear the noise, and I think you guys do too. Well, the Dolphins didn't have a tight end that scored a touchdown last year. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle still deserve over 10 targets a game each. The Dolphins target tight ends less than any other team in the NFL, and I don't even think it's relatively close. So, Kat, why are we excited about a tight end?
Well, I mean, Jonnu Smith is a move tight end. He's a receiving tight end, and that's something that they didn't have a lot of last year. I like Jerome Smith. I think he's a good player. It also gives the Dolphins a little flexibility. If they get very desperate, they could shave a few $1 million if they can't get below or be compliant with the salary cap by March 13th. I expect Jerome Smith to be on the team as well, but I don't think it's just tight end, but I also think it bleeds over to receiver. I mean, where Jonnu Smith, when he came out of FIU, a few years ago, ran a 4.62, 247 pounds, and last year, I mean, he caught 50 passes for the Falcons, and I'd argue that the reason he's not there anymore is because Arthur Smith isn't there anymore as the head coach. Arthur Smith, head coach of the Falcons last year, also offensive coordinator for the Titans when Jonnu Smith was drafted. So, the offensive coordinator of the team that drafted him wanted him with the Falcons. So there's, that certainly says something about him. But, you're talking about a guy that just 3 years ago, the Patriots signed 4 years, $50 million. So this was a highly coveted player just a few years ago. He went with the Falcons last year, caught 50 passes and was targeted, I think, only 13 fewer times than Kyle Pitts was. So this is somebody at 2 years, up to $10 million. I think it's a really good value. And I also think, too, and this might be the depressing part of the situation, is that it might be the Dolphins' biggest free agent of the offseason.
I like that. You might be. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that, but I am intrigued by this. I mean, this is a guy you mentioned with Atlanta. I don't know about either of you. I play fantasy football. I know Jake does. I don't know if you do, Cat, but we've had Kyle Pitts in leagues. I mean, there have been times when you're just sitting there and you're like, damn it, dude. Jonnu Smith just sniped a touchdown, when they were down at the end zone, catching passes from Tyler Hinkey, Desmond Ridder coming into this offense. I'm intrigued to see the way that Mike McDaniel uses that, like you said, a different type of tight end, a guy who we've seen in the past, take balls out of the backfield, right? He's shown that he can even carry the rock a bit. So to use that motion to add him as, I don't necessarily think he's going to be that third target. I think they still need to go out there and bring in a third wide receiver, unless Eric Ezukoma's, on another level at this point. I don't know how his rehab's going truly, but adding Jonnu Smith, I think it's going to be a bigger deal at the end of the season than maybe we think, if that makes any sense.
So I think about the time he spent in Atlanta. Last year in the red zone, he had 9 targets, 6 receptions, 2 touchdowns. And I think it was Armando Salguero who really punchlined the who's always wide open in the end zone, in the red zone. It's the tight end, like in the back. And, we had so many highlights of Mike Gesicki soaring through the back previously. But I think one of the things that makes me so excited about this signing is that Jonnu Smith is an incredibly smart player. You can line him up out wide. You can have him be your inline tight end. He can understand the blocking schemes. I've seen him line up in the backfield. And when you think about this Mike McDaniel offense and how much it absolutely loves to attack space, I think having the third fastest speed by a tight end since 2016 will be an absolute game changer for the defense. Now, I also saw people saying, like, this isn't prime time Tony Gonzalez. Why are we so excited about Jonnu Smith? Well, you can tell that it's kind of a slightly dull moment of the offseason because Next Gen Stats, the NFL count, is just absolutely emptying the chamber on Jonnu Smith stats. One I have right here, Yak over expected leaders in 2023. Rachaad White was first. And when you think about the Bucs, you think about how Rachaad White was used. That was an offense that had 2 prime time wide receivers, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Number 2 on that list is kind of an outlier in Deebo Samuel because, yes, Deebo is an absolute stud, a top 5 wide receiver in this league. It's a little easier to attack open space when you have the George Kittles and the Christian McCaffreys and just stars at every level of that offense. Jonnu Smith was third on that. You think Kyle Pitts, Drake London, that's an exciting duo. Obviously, you can take advantage of mismatches when you have those guys up front. And then 4th and 5th, Chase Brown and Joe Mixon, 2 guys on the Bengals, 2 running backs on the Bengals, who both had the privilege of working with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, guys like that. So, I mean, just the way he can fit into this offense where you have 2 stud receivers who are going to require so much attention, so many targets. All you need is one mistake over the middle for Jonnu Smith to completely burn you. And to me, man, that is super exciting in this Mike McDaniel offense where you can severely punish defenses when they make a mistake. That screams what happened in that Broncos game, like to perfection.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating stat with the yards after catch. And just to piggyback on what you said there, with with the needs that the Dolphins are going to have this offseason along the offensive line and on the defense, now, after you get past quarterback and running back, at fullback, wide receiver, and tight end now, you're going to have to get Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Alec Ingold, Jonnu Smith, Durham Smythe. You're going to have those are kind of your 5 guys you're looking to get on the field this year. And then from that point, there's not a lot of room at wide receiver. There's none at tight end. And so that's a good problem for the Dolphins, because now they can really take their resources, the few resources that they do have, and focus it on the offensive line and defense, because Jonnu Smith is versatile. He is a tight end, and he also can line up in the slot too. So he helps satisfy a need for a receiver too.
Yeah, I think Mike McDaniel's probably licking his chops. And I think this goes back to what we said, or at least we brought up on a previous podcast, is the fact that Chris Grier almost, tries to plug some of these holes prior to the draft and things like that, so they don't have to go in there and truly have to target one position, have a certain need. So bringing in Jonnu Smith, I mean, at this point of the season, you really couldn't have gone anywhere else, right? I see people talking about Noah Fant, some of these other guys, but that seems like the exact same tier we're on here with Jonnu Smith. So his versatility is absolutely something that's intriguing. I think you guys brought up, he led all tight ends last year in yards after the catch. So bringing that in, running those crossers underneath, being that security blanket. I guess my biggest concern is we joke that this offense runs through Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Is Tua ever going to get to Jonnu Smith in his progressions, or is he just going to unload that ball to some of those other guys? I'm joking here, but again, this is a different player that this offense has yet to have, and I'm intrigued by it.
It was super funny. I saw a stat about Devontae Parker today about how he's been last in the league in yards, in terms of separation yards, in each of the last 3 years.
Leave him alone.
I think about Mike Gesicki the same way. I think this is a really unique scenario where the Dolphins, I mean, my God, they haven't had a good tight end in over 20 years. But Jonnu Smith, hey, it's March 7th. I'm going to be a homer. It kind of seems like this is the ideal fit for this offense. This is a very intelligent player, and I think he knows how to attack that open space a little bit more, where while he is a tight end, I think him as a receiving weapon is something Tua might be a little more comfortable with, instead of like a Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, even like a Durham Smythe.
Right. And Tua likes receivers who separate, not ones that he has to throw jump balls to. And it's always been like that. It's why he was such a poor fit with Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki, and why he's been a great fit with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And now you take Jonnu Smith, not only versatile, not only good after the catch, but also a separator too. Don't ask for a lot of them as far as blocking, but that's not going to be his job. So, I'm excited about the signing, for 2 years and up to $10 million. I mean, I think that's really good value.
How quickly do we think this is a deal that's signed, Josh? I mean, because the Dolphins are still about $20 million over the cap. Is this maybe a deal where they kind of said, give us a little bit of time? Would you be surprised if this isn't something that isn't, officially announced till June 1st?
Yeah, that's something that only Don Aponte might know. I'm not sure certainly how it's going to fit under the cap, but I do think that what if the Dolphins were to franchise tag Christian Wilkins at some point? They wouldn't have had this money right now to go out there and get Jonnu Smith, who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, had reportedly some other suitors. So bringing him in here to let him go out there again, I think this is a piece that this Dolphins offense hasn't had for so many years. You brought up Mike Gesicki, Jake, but I mean, let's be honest, this might be a better fit than Mike Gesicki was in this offense, and his yards after the catch is something that Mike Gesicki, that's just not something he does, right? He goes down, starts the Bambi legs, and he goes down upon first contact. So this is just another piece. So cheap value, intrigued to see what happens. Happy Jonnu Smith Day.
I don't know if you guys heard, but I'm starting to realize there was this massive collective cheer from 31 other teams when it was announced the Miami Dolphins wouldn't be using the franchise tag on Christian Wilkins. I was listening to the Athletic pod the other day, and it just seems like everyone at the combine, Christian Wilkins was one of the first 3-4 names out of everyone's mouth about guys who were really interested to see hit the open market. So let's start turning the page here to defense. We spoke about Christian Wilkins yesterday, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but Kat, where are you thinking about his chance to return to Miami? One of the funniest things I've seen happen is Chris Grier come out and say there's a key under the mat, quote unquote, for Xavier Howard. Today we hear on the Joe Rogan show that Xavier Howard said, nah, that door is completely closed. Is this scenario anyway similar, or does it come down to the fact the Dolphins can't afford a $20 million franchise tag, but maybe that first year they can work around things still?
No, I think Christian Wilkins is a goner as well. And to me, for me mentally, Christian Wilkins was gone the minute Zach Sealer was signed. I thought it was one or the other, not both. And, at the beginning of last year, they were talking about Christian Wilkins talking through a contract with the Dolphins. Everything I've heard is that he was looking for north of $20 million a year. Whether that's true or not, it's all the footprints have led to me to believe that is true. And then once that wasn't budged on, Zach Sealer got 3 years, $38 million. And then I think on the offensive side of the ball, it was the same thing, where once the team realized what he wanted, they turned their attention to Austin Jackson. So I don't expect any way Christian Wilkins getting a franchise tag or getting a long-term contract here with the Dolphins. I expect him to leave via free agency and for the Dolphins to get a third-round comp pick next year for him.
I do think that's where Jake and I kind of fell. I think we prematurely jumped in a year earlier than we should have, on at least because I thought it was time to come up with those contracts, but we thought it was going to be one way or the other. But again, you just hope there was some way the Dolphins would find a way to lock up Christian Wilkins. You see them making these trades for a Bradley Chubb, a Tyreek Hill. You thought maybe they would pay a guy that, is that valuable, but Jake's sitting there saying how all these people at the combine are just excited and ecstatic to see where he ends up. He's going to get north of $20 million. It just doesn't work for the Miami Dolphins. You didn't have to throw a shot at Robert Hunt, though. I saw that, Kat. You said how they signed Austin Jackson, so now we're going to miss out on Robert Hunt. I'm praying that little picture – we're on defense, I'm sorry. I'm praying that little picture Robert Hunt posted was he might re-sign because –
What was the picture?
It was just the stadium, right? It was like the practice field with the stadium in the background. A real beautiful shot, right? Real beautiful stuff. But I just at the beginning of this, I thought Robert Hunt needed to be re-signed. Again, I think he's versatile, that he could play tackle if he has to. But you saying that is one or the other, I think you might be right. Now I'm just a little bit heartbroken.
We saw Ezra Cleveland on Thursday sign a deal where he's about making $9 million per year. And this was kind of one of those situations where the Dolphins could have pursued someone like him at the trade deadline. The Jaguars ended up doing it. Guys, if Ezra Cleveland is getting $9 million, I'm very scared about the possibilities of Robert Hunt could make. Don't get me wrong. Always go out and get your money. But I mean, I do think there's a legitimate conversation, because you do look at the splits of Robert Hunt on and off the field. The Dolphins are a much better team with Robert Hunt. But where is the line where you say, we just can't do this? We need to just find answers elsewhere, because that Robert Hunt, if you're talking about a $20 million per deal where you have some teams close to $70, $80 million in cap space, they might do that. That makes me feel pretty queasy.
Right. Well, one question I've continued to ask is there one team out there that thinks he's a right tackle?
It's a great point.
In a league where Jawan Taylor got $20 million last year, Mike McGlinchey got $17 million. Robert Hunt is better at guard. We've seen that, but I thought he played well at right tackle too. And that's a really difficult resource to go out and try to find. So if there's one team that will sign him to play right tackle, I think he will get $17 million a year. I'd love to have Hunt back. I just don't see it happening. And I'm starting to think that, for better or worse, Mike McDaniel's kind of looking at this team and saying, well, I can't just go to the supermarket and get a Bradley Chubb or a Tyreek Hill. But I think I can get three fat guys in the middle of the offensive line to block for 3 or 3.5 seconds.
Adam Gase did it.
That's yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I think he's thinking. And when you look at, that tree from Sean McVay, of McDaniel, of Kyle Shanahan, they don't value interior offensive linemen as much as other teams do. So I think that also factors into this too. So I love Robert Hunt, but I do think he like Christian Wilkins is going to be on another team next year.
Yeah, you asked which team would value him as a right tackle, and I was going to say Team Houtz, and then I realized that you were saying it as almost a compliment to him, that he could, ideally, or if a team needed a right tackle, he could shift over there because he's shown that he can play that position. But again, I think he's just on a different tier at right guard.
Yep.
But you mentioned just bringing 3 fat guys to plug in. I mean, after what Butch Barry just did this previous year, I mean, maybe Mike McDaniel is feeling that way. So I don't know. I'd hate to see Rob Hunt go. Again, that was the guy I think when we sat here and came into this all season, that was at the top of my list to re-sign. But we knew what the cap situation was, and in order for this team to bring in some other pieces, fill some other needs, you might have to let go of a Rob Hunt, especially if, like Jake said, a team's willing to offer him that much money. I mean, I love the guy, but even then, I think I'd be out.
And once he got the ball in his hands and started moving down the field with it, his price tag just went so through the roof. I'm interested to see where that pick could settle. I'd love a perfect world where you could maybe get 2 third-round comp picks when you get really surprised about how this Robert Hunt situation could unfold. And that's why I kind of like Miami's approach so far, where they aren't closing the door on any of these guys. I know that's kind of PR-y in a sense, but we've seen it happen with Xavier Howard and Emmanuel Ogbah where they do make these deals. But this team is one that needs to clear some cap space, and they decided to move on in a pretty surprising move, actually. Decided to release Jerome Baker. The two sides spoke about restructuring a contract. It did not get done. Man, talking Jerome Baker really makes you realize how quickly time flies. He spent 6 seasons with the Miami Dolphins. 2023 was the first time he played less than 16 games. And I was kind of going through Miami's defenses since Baker got here. It makes you kind of forget that Landon Roberts was actually a big part of this team for multiple years. It was kind of those guys in the middle for so long. Little disappointing. You love to see those homegrown guys, but for years we spoke about that the Dolphins linebackers weren't good enough. And I think that's worth bringing up no matter how salty it might sound.
I think Kiko Alonso was still here when Baker was drafted.
Yes. Yeah.
And oh God, so look, I know Jerome
no Kiko
Baker.
Slander, please. No Kiko slander.
Oh gosh.
Where to begin?
Kiko is, oh man. I blame the scheme more than him, but I still hated him. I mean, he
didn't know what sideline to go to, but it's okay.
He didn't know that, and he tried to kill Joe Flacco, but I've seen bad inside linebacker play. Kiko Alonso was it. He'd make a big play every 4 games and then allow 12 more. But anyway, no, Baker I think he's been solid for the last 5 or 6 years. I was always wanting him to make more plays. Mm-hmm. He had a few seasons where he had 5 or 6 sacks, and he had the pick 6 this year against Philadelphia. He might be a guy that we didn't realize what we really had until he was gone. But still, even with that, the Dolphins need to cut some money. $10 million is a nice chunk of change to get off the books. So I wish him the best, but yeah, I think it had to be done.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. You hate to see him go. I mean, I think he's 4th all time in tackles, 587 total. I have it written down jokingly that it's Channing Tindall's season, but you hate to see Jerome Baker go. I mean, I do love what David Long brought to the table, but every year I come on here and say the Dolphins need to bring in a linebacker. So getting rid of Jerome Baker had to happen, but now you need to bring in someone who's obviously going to take that spot.
Can we walk through the conversation real quick about what a return to Miami would look like? Because yes, the Dolphins cleared up $9.8 million in cap space, but they already are eating a $5 million dead cap hit as well. So in order for like a reunion to happen, in order for him to come back, you'd have to consider that $5 million dead cap hit. And then if you pay him another $5 million, all of a sudden the entire, cap space you're freeing up disappears. So Kat, what would you say the odds are that? And is it a scenario where the longer it goes throughout this offseason that maybe Jerome Baker doesn't sign, that Xavier Howard money might come in handy for someone like him?
Yeah, I'd say the odds of him being back are between 0 and 1%. I mean, wow. To me, that is something that's really nice that the player and the team say that, hey, we're keeping the door open, the lines of conversation. Rarely, if ever, do they come back, though. I mean, you've got to think that, over these last several months to a year, the agent, the player, the team, they've talked through all that. And if there was anything they could have worked out, they would have done it by now. And there was just no way to do that. So, those players, everyone that you see gone, Xavier Howard, Jerome Baker, Emmanuel Ogbah, and pretty soon Christian Wilkins. I don't anticipate them being back.
Yeah, and you can even throw, I mean, you mentioned Rob Hunt. You can even kind of throw him in there. I guess we just as fans sometimes hope that they can find a way to bring him back, right? I mean, it's nice, like you said, Jerome Baker saying come back. I guess the only way that happens if they go out there and their market isn't what they think it is. But with the cap going up, with some of these players being signed for what they were, I think we're all going to see them go elsewhere. And just got to take it on the chin and hope that we get them compensatory picks.
A move I mentioned yesterday on our show, and if you want to listen to my speech about him, you can go back and listen to yesterday's show, but they also released Keon Crossan to save $3 million against the salary cap for him too. Before we transition here, guys, what have been your thoughts about how the Miami Dolphins have approached their salary cap situation? Because there were a bunch of people on Twitter going full Pepe Silvia, right? They were smoking a pack of cigarettes. They were figuring out how can we open up as much cap space as possible. But it's been clear the Dolphins don't think that's necessarily the most healthy thing to restructure Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. They're kind of going step by step here, and they've seemed to have enough flexibility where they even able to add Jonnu Smith. So, I mean, I kind of like this approach. Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, they've done just about what I thought they were going to do so far. I mean, they've cut a lot, and I expected them to cut a lot. And, it's starting to become obvious that, re-signing Christian Wilkins, Robert Hunt, Connor Williams, at least all of them, was nothing more than a pipe dream. I mean, they just don't have the money to do it. I mean, the Dolphins have spent a lot of money over the last 4 years between that complete tear down in 2019 to now in 2024. And I think the Dolphins, even though they didn't unfortunately win a playoff game in those 4 years, I don't regret that they did that. I think that they stockpiled a lot of resources and they took their shot. And they've acquired a lot of good players. And they still have good players this year. I mean, we're talking about returning just about every player on an offense that was first in the league last year and second in points. I mean, a lot of those parts are returning except for the interior line that needs to get figured out. So there still is some reason for excitement here, but they're going to lose a lot this offseason. They've already lost a lot.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I mean, I guess in hindsight, now that we're at this spot, right, you're seeing these big names go. You're kind of looking back at what could have been last year, those different games that they threw away. I mean, we all look at the Tennessee Titans game. I don't know about you. We wake up in the morning, you think about it, you go to bed at night, you're thinking about it. I mean, there were missed opportunities last year. You realize now that maybe that clearly the team's not going to look the same, but I am okay with the way they're going out there. I mean, we're talking about the linebacker cutting Jerome Baker. We're talking, if you look at the roster, I believe I saw someone mention Anthony Weaver using more, 2-3 safety looks. I mean, the Dolphins have Javon Holland. You look at this market, I think it was Diana Rossini. I hope I said that right. I believe she's for the Athletic, said that the safety and linebacker market is completely dried up. So you see what Chris Grier is doing. They're clearing cap space. You bring in a guy that, can at least add a little bit of a different element to that offense. And then, you're going to fill some of those needs with guys that are, I think she even said it's depressing what some of these guys might make on the market, 1-2 year deals. So bringing in a linebacker, they can play next to David Long, bringing in a safety that can play next to Javon Holland. I know Kat tweeted out to Sean Elliott. I mean, that's a guy that we were all pretty stoked on. We were all talking about, bringing back for sure. I mean, his market, what's it going to be with some of those big names out there? So I like the way they're approaching this. I think there's going to be some nice pieces that they sign for relatively cheap. And again, I just look back and just think what could have been with that Dolphins team that we saw last season with all these big names parting this year.
Yeah, the safety market is really flooded. I mean, Justin Simmons cut today. I mean, huge. Yeah, I mean, 700 or 985 snaps he played last year, made the Pro Bowl. And so just cut in the last week at the safety spot, Justin Simmons, Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, Kevin Byard, Jordan Poyer, Marcus May. So I look at Deshaun Elliott and I always thought, hey, he's probably going to leave via free agency because he played pretty well for the Dolphins last year. He only made, $2 million last year. But I look at the rest of this safety market and think he may not make more or much more than the $2 million he made last year. I thought he played pretty well for the Dolphins until he hurt his knees late in the season.
That's
And
what's
real
so
quick, Jake,
interesting.
can I just throw Brandon Jones' name out there too, right? I mean, what could his market be? I mean, he's a guy who I think Dolphin fans put on a different pedestal, but he's a name that's out there on a free agent. And if you're saying Deshaun Elliott might get this relatively low contract, I mean, Brandon Jones, my God, would even be a little bit lower than that. So definitely some value out there. And with the Dolphins in that cap situation, it's perfect for Chris Grier and company.
The Dolphins made one additional signing this week. I don't know what to think about this one. It's they decided to sign Isaiah Mack, defensive tackle. He's been in the league for 4 seasons, 337 career snaps. He's appeared or had at least a cup of coffee with 8 different teams. 1 start. He's played in 25 games. You don't have to look too far to see that he spent probably the most of his time with the Baltimore Ravens, which is where new defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver was previously. Kat, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but 6'3", 300 pounds. Why are the Dolphins feeling this is a move they got to make right now?
Because right now he would be starting for the Dolphins. Look, they're if Christian Wilkins is a free agent, as we know, and Raekwon Davis is also a free agent. And I'm not sure what Raekwon's market's going to be because he's really a 2-down player, but he's also, young. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. He's somebody that if the Dolphins can get back for a few $1 million, I would like for them to try to get him back. But if not, you're going to see them take some flyers on some of these players. Just these $2-3 million a year type of defensive linemen here that can hopefully tie up blocks and do a serviceable job. You see the Ravens signing these types of players and drafting these players all the time, like, guys like Derek Wolfe and Brent Urban and just kind of these seat fillers. And I expect that to be the same way with the Dolphins. The Patriots released Lawrence Guy, who's 34, but can he give you a decent year as a 3-4 end? He might be able to. And those are the types of players I think the Dolphins are going to look at.
Yeah, my thing cut out. I don't know if what Kat said when you asked him why they did this, but it's obvious, right? They need a defensive tackle there. I had no idea this even happened, Jake. I was sitting there. I feel so embarrassed. I mean, I'm sitting here, the guy that you can go back and look. I did Zach Sealer Cups when the Dolphins picked him up. I had no idea. I thought that was like a flub in our last podcast we did when you said they signed a defensive tackle. I've been trying to stay off Twitter, things like that. I had no idea they signed this guy. So this is my first time hearing it. Can you tell me that's Khalil Mack's brother by any chance? Like, give me some good news here.
I think Kat hit the best news possible, is that the only reason they signed him because he'd be a starter. I don't want to discredit Udonis Haslem, but I kind of see him as like a culture piece in that sense, just somebody who knows the system, somebody who I think can come in and probably talk to people right away and really just kind of help the system smooth itself out quicker, maybe like a River Craycraft did when Mike McDaniel came over for that offense. That's just me going full tinfoil hat here, but that's kind of what I'm thinking here, is that you just have like a quote unquote cliche coach on the field.
Yeah, I mean, Isaiah Mack does have some starting experience. It's been a couple of years, but between the Titans, the Patriots, and the Ravens, he started 23 games between 2019 and 2021. So he's been around the league for a while. Like you said, has sniffed around 8 teams, so has some experience, but has also left a lot of places too. So, but these are the type of players that the Dolphins fans are going to have to get used to them signing this offseason. They're not going to come away with a Byron Jones or a Tyreek Hill or trade for a Bradley Chubb. That stuff's not going to happen anymore. They've got to kind of take their medicine a little bit, but that doesn't mean they still can't, piece together a decent defensive line and spend their resources on other positions.
Yeah, I think we got to trust in Anthony Weaver, and let's not forget the last acorn that the Dolphins took away from the Baltimore Ravens, right? Wasn't that Zach Sealer? So you were sitting here talking about him, and all I think is could this be our next Zach Sealer? So intrigued because obviously Anthony Weaver saw something, and like you guys mentioned, we're going to throw as many bodies up front with the current cap situation.
It's the off season, but it's only fair to end the episode with a little bit of drama. I don't know if you guys saw this, but Tyreek Hill appeared on the Pivot podcast. Ryan Clark, Chaden Crowder on that show. And my bad, I transcribed this. There's going to be some swearing. We marked the podcast as explicit, so my bad. You can turn it off here if the kids are present. But Tyreek Hill on the podcast was talking about the Miami Dolphins offense and how it needs to improve. He basically said that we done had some battles in there. It's been no you and then I'll talk to you later or next week. We don't need that. We need to come back and talk about it, not hold grudges with each other for day after day. So, Kat, you think about how this Miami Dolphins offense really sputtered out of control near the end of the year. I think they were averaging about 13 points per game. That game against the Dallas Cowboys, it was all Jason Sanders kicking field goals. I think the Dolphins got the ball back at the 40-yard line and the lead against the Buffalo Bills in week 18, and they still gave that up. There was a lot of frustrating moments. We saw it on Twitter. We couldn't imagine what it's like in that locker room. So does any of this surprise you when you hear about those struggles and then there's a little bit of infighting there?
No, not at all. And Tyreek Hill is willing to say whatever comes to mind for good and bad. But I mean, look, it comes down to miscommunication on the road on that offense. And yes, when you can't get it together on the field and you're taking penalties and players are missing assignments, you expect a lot of finger pointing inside the locker room. I think there'd be a problem if there wasn't some finger pointing. The question is, what are you going to do about it this year? I mean, because look, you can't go on the road. If you go out on the road and the first quality opponent you face, you lose because you can't get on the same page again. Now I'm going to be thinking, okay, now this is your third season here with Mike McDaniel. Why can't you get on the same page when it's not 70 degrees and sunny in South Florida? So yeah, not a surprise. And I also didn't know I could just drop F-bombs during the show. I wish you had told me that at the beginning.
Nickel per F-bomb.
No, but yeah, I'm not surprised by the comments.
And with that too, Tyreek Hill spent a lot of time talking about how Patrick Mahomes would make them work through things. So the way he would continuously bring up someone like Patrick Mahomes, it really did make it feel like there was a situation going on where it was, this is something that has to do with Tua. And I don't want to bash Tua. I don't want to make this all about him, but as a 25-year-old, I think we all went through the phase of just kind of being again, we hit the explicit tag, just being a little bitchy, right? Someone says something you don't like. Well, F you, I'm going to take my ball. I'm going to go home and I'm not going to talk to you for a little bit, which is fair. It's understandable. But I think the next step for this Dolphins offense, we talked about it on the field by adding Jonnu Smith, is just straight up being willing to talk to each other. It kind of seemed a little forced late in the season during Hard Knocks where Mike McDaniel was bringing up a bunch of issues people made. He'd say that he'd show a clip where Jalen Ramsey might have been hunting for an interception and he got torched on the play. And then he'd show something like a fade route where he said that was a very dumb play call. It all seemed kind of forced and kind of awkward where that might not necessarily be how this team operates. Another interesting part that Tyreek brought up was it being Ryan Clark's podcast. He brought up the fact that he basically called Tua fat during the preseason and how Tua reacted saying next time I see you, it's on site. Basically went Will Smith saying, keep my name out of your MF mouth, those type of things. And Tyreek Hill kind of joked about it. And he was joking, pretending to call up Ryan Clark saying, hey, can you see one more thing so we could see Tua explode? It's just kind of we want to see that next phase from Tua. We want to see him become this dude who he can say things after the fact, or he can mind his own business. We want him to be out in the field, be the center of attention, say, no, F you. I'm going to kick. I'm going to scream. I'm going to fight all the way to the end to make this play successful. I don't think there's much wrong with that.
No, I don't. And I want Tua to come back with an attitude and look,
Tua.
Added to it, yeah. So I mean, salty to it, added to it, yeah. I mean, any way you want to phrase that. I don't try to put up any argument against that. The Dolphins offense and Tua specifically didn't play well against good teams last year, especially in the fourth quarter. And you can call it choking, call it whatever you want. To me, there's nothing I've seen in the totality of Tua's career that leads me to believe that he's a choke artist in the fourth quarter or can't rise to the occasion. But that's got to be the next step in his development here. I mean, not to say that Tua is going to become an all-time great quarterback, but Peyton Manning went through this. Drew Brees went through this. A lot of these quarterbacks went through this, where they got to a certain level of excellence, and then they had to take that next step up and start winning these big games when they, got in their late 20s and 30s. So that's got to be the next step in his development. But we'll see. I mean, he's got to get it done.
I mean, that's the great example. And I mean, when you're getting ready to roll out the red carpet, right, and getting ready to pay him like that, you need to see him win those games late in December, January. I mean, we all love to. I think I can speak for all of us when I say this is arguably the best quarterback that we've seen since Dan Marino, if not the best quarterback we've seen since Dan Marino. But if you're not winning games when it matters most, I personally no longer give a crap what you do during a regular season. I mean, just led the league in passing, right? And I mean, until you can win a game, that matters in January and February. I hope to God February, right? That would be amazing. But I do like that Tyreek Hill, he did say there's no more excuses this year. And I did have written down, we're talking about the offense and how it, kind of magic carped out of water, late in the year. It does have to go as well. We have to blame the coaching as well, right? Because it's not just the players out there executing. We've seen in the past Mike McDaniel kind of choke on his words. We've seen him burn timeouts, challenges, things like that. Again, he's a young coach learning on the fly, but the way this roster's set up, the way we're sitting here trying to pinch pennies, we don't have any longer to sit here and hold the leash, right? We need to start seeing results. So I don't know what I'm even saying anymore.
Yeah, I think the Dolphins, there were only 2 or 3 teams that ran the ball less frequently than the Miami Dolphins did at near the end of the season there. You could tell that, like, every week you're supposed to build on the previous week, and it seemed by the end of the year that the Dolphins kind of were forgetting things, and it seemed like some of those developmental steps they took just kind of disappeared. And also, too, if this is a scenario where Tua maybe gets a little frustrated, like someone drops a couple F-bombs and he says, all right, I'm going to let you cool down. I'll come to you talk in a couple days. That kind of like little, or I don't know, grudge holding. Doesn't that kind of scream Nick Saban, Brian Flores type attitude? Doesn't this kind of scream this idea of like old school football versus new school football where everybody just needs to, instead of hold a grudge, come in, get it all out there, have that verbal diarrhea. Let's get through it. Let's talk it out. And then it will be over instead of it hanging over our head for 3 weeks.
I think you've nailed why I don't watch Hard Knocks. Look, Tua needs to play better, and he needs to continue to be the leader of the team and get everybody on the same page. All the leadership factors is not something I concern myself as much with. They need to communicate better and get on the same page. All the other stuff are things I can speculate on. I don't have firsthand knowledge on, but they just have to play better against good teams next year. And it might be harder to play better against those teams, given what the Dolphins are going to lose this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. We need to see them have results. I'm sitting here smirking, thinking because what are the odds that maybe Tua had to underthrow a pass or something? Tyreek just says some smart ass comment, and Tua is just all pissy the rest of the day. I mean, that's kind of what I'm picturing now in my head. So yeah, I don't know what to think of that. I mean, it's definitely not what I want to hear. Again, I think I don't know if I even said it yet, but Kat was talking about how good or bad Tyreek's going out there on these pods and saying things. I personally would rather him not do it, right? I mean, we're seeing these different shadows cast over Miami. You're starting to see a little bit of friction there, but it's football, right? We've all been out there and we've all, gotten pissy with our friends competing one-on-one. So I just hope better days are ahead, right? We need to see this team win a playoff game before we die.
I love that. I love having Kat on the podcast because there are some topics where he treats us like we just kind of drew our first picture that we want to hang on the fridge. He's like, oh yeah, that's cute, but it doesn't really matter type thing. And that's so important with these type of conversations. It does not matter what is said in the locker room. The only thing that matters is the flat out results. And with that being said, Kat, let me hear your steaming take about Tua hiring a quarterback coach.
Yeah. Why did it take so long? I mean, I was kind of thrown off by that. I mean, and I started thinking like, how many quarterbacks don't have quarterback coaches? I mean, sure, I imagine a lot of them don't, but it was a little surprising. I mean, hey, I'm glad that he hired a Taekwondo coach first last offseason so that he knows not to fall on his head, because that was the major problem to his game. Now, getting in somebody to fine tune the rest, to assist him in fine-tuning the rest of his points of the game. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. But, it's interesting that 2 years ago, there was genuine talk about how hard of a worker Tua was. And it seems like every offseason he's piling on more and more. So I'm not concerned about his work ethic, and hopefully we see that on the field this year.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about, Tua and a lot of these players, right? It seems like every year they build upon the previous year. I was gonna sit here and joke, it's all fun and games till we find out it's Trent Dilfer or something like that. That's the one
Oh
doing
my
this.
God,
Chris
how
Sims,
could you do that
maybe
to
they
me?
made amends and they're sitting there. Oh man.
That
If
hit
it
me
drops,
hard.
I
That
had
hit
it
me
first.
hard.
Remember that.
Oh man, Josh, what a perfect way to end the podcast. If Trent Dilfer becomes the quarterback coach, I'm gonna have to throw a fit. But that is it. That is all the time we have here today on another Dolphins podcast. Cat Houtz, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back early next week as we gear up for free agency and the draft shortly after. But until then, have a wonderful weekend, and most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.